So two challenges today that I think that comes to the surface. One from our first reading from Galatians. We started in the book of Galatians here yesterday, and today we're in chapter 2, and then one challenge from our gospel. So this is where Paul, infamously, if you will, rebukes Peter, calls out Peter, and this is where some, Protestants will point to and say, "See, this is why the Pope, or this is why Peter, isn't the primary apostle, not the Pope. He's not, not the infallibility." But the things that Paul calls out, it's not Peter, what he teaches on matters of faith, but rather Peter's behavior. And behavior from a pope, as we know, as there's been many bad popes, does not call into question the infallibility of the pope. So real quick, just the situation here that Paul lays out here in his letter to the Galatians. If you've never read through the letter of Galatians, Paul's, he's got deep love for this community in which he was at, that he converted and gave the gospel to many people. And he even starts out most of his letters by giving out my dear brothers and sisters in Christ. And he starts out this letter just like going right at them, just like this fiery Paul, just this big disappointment with how they've fallen away. They've listened, and they've started listening to a false gospel. And that false gospel primarily was that the Mosaic law needed to be kept. And so the circumcision comes up here. And anyways, Peter would eat with the Gentiles. And what he did was when the Jewish Christians came in, Peter left and stopped eating with the Gentiles. And so Paul sees this, and he calls out Peter and is like, "What the heck are you doing? This is going to throw into question the very thing that we're trying to squash, and that is the thought that the Mosaic law needs to be kept." And so Peter knew this. Again, the problem was with his behavior, not what he was teaching. And, just the challenge here is that why Peter kind of balked, I think, on his behavior is because he ended up getting just worried on what other people were thinking. What are the Jewish Christians going to think as they see me eating with the Gentiles? I know what's right. And just like this overly concerned with what other people are thinking, what impression am I making on people? It can be crippling. Yesterday we were talking about, that peace, that interior peace. It's a big way to be robbed of that. I think St. Augustine kind of really, mentions that in relations to vainglory, this overly concern on what other people think about me. What impression am I making upon others? And it affects Peter's behavior. And Paul calls out Peter, as well he should have, in fraternal correction, which of course we know is needed even sometimes towards our superiors and leaders. And then maybe just the other challenge that came up as it relates to the gospel. Again, yesterday we were talking about Martha being burdened, and we said that the soul is healed, rest is received by or through union with God. That rest isn't something so much that we try to grab and get and obtain, but rather rest, as the Christian tradition understands, rest is something that's imparted to us by God, the Creator. And so here Jesus is off in the spot praying. The apostles are seeing him, and he gets done. Jesus gets done, and the disciples basically say, "What you just did, what we just saw you do, teach us how to do that. I want to know how to do what you just did." And of course, Jesus gives them the Our Father, and just focusing on the phrase, "Give us each day our daily bread." Augustine, mentions how that phrase there, he says, well, what is that, our daily bread, that Jesus is asking us to pray to for the Father? And he says it's it's both things of both all the things that meets the wants in this life, and then secondly, the sacrament of Jesus and his body that he's given us that we can receive daily. But just struck by the fact, and the challenge here is to give us each day our daily bread, not our weekly bread, not our monthly bread, but sometimes I can, look down the road of too many, too many worries, too many concerns that the Lord's like, today, it's day by day. What is it in, the Sermon on the Mount? Jesus says, for tomorrow's worries are enough, or today's worries are enough for today. To not be anxious for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. And, it's all the more the spot of as one grows in deeper communion with Jesus, deeper communion with the Trinity, it's always the case that one becomes more realizing their dependency upon God. That's the movement of all the saints. Cyril of Alexandria says, praying this way, praying for today's daily bread, the needs for today, the trust that the Father will provide, praying this way, we cultivate a saint-like poverty. That's right on. And so the challenge for us, for me, for you today, is those two things maybe. It's to help us to stay away from the movement that Peter went into there, being concerned about what others think. What impression am I making up? No. Lord, I'm following you in your will here, being obedient to you, and not worried about that, not letting that rob my peace, as it did with Peter, and that it even changed his behavior. And secondly, to pray as the Lord gave us this prayer, to give us each day our daily bread, to not get out ahead of ourselves, but to rely on him and to grow in that childlike trust and need for God, for everything.